Thank you, Lynn, and thanks for promoting our athletics program. I very much appreciate that. There's another set of accomplishments I want to mention that I really think will help the game experience. We've been able to get Josh's snow cones to food truck at the game. The thing that the students love the most is Chick-fil-A, so that's there. And most recently, I was at the University of Cincinnati game, a game that we were hanging in there, and I rode the elevator up to the visiting president's suite with the chief of police of City of Cincinnati. And I'd noticed that Cincinnati stadium was full, but everybody was sitting on kind of the mezzanine level drinking craft beer. And they had turned the football game into a social event. And I asked the chief of police, I said, do you have any trouble with beer and wine at your football games? He said, we've been doing this for 30 years. So at the football games this year, we have beer and wine too. So, what I want to talk about today really does fit with your guiding principles document that you have here. And I want to talk about integrity and courage as foundations for ethical behavior and ethical decisions. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be building toward asking and answering a question, can an institution have courage? We know people can have courage, but can you have an institution that itself is courageous? And if you think about the term courage, it oftentimes is an individual concept. To be courageous, you have to step out. You alone have to go your way, oftentimes against the grain of where others are going. That's courageous for the most part. But can an institution do that as well? And I'm going to start with some personal stories that talk a little bit about my family and how they instilled in me this willingness to step out and to go my own direction every once in a while. And then I'm going to switch gears and talk about some of the difficult things we are taking on at the TU campus. We're going to talk about taking on sexual assault on college campuses. We're going to talk about binge drinking on college campuses. We're going to talk about tension in America and the central role that Gilcrease Museum can actually play in understanding tension in America. And then I'm going to talk about one of my most recent projects with the Zero Foundation, which is really making a difference around mental illness and addiction, and how can a university play a role in that. I'm going to start by reading two stories to you. Every 2 years, the faculty at the University of Tulsa put together a book called A Life of Inquiry. And it's a set of stories to the incoming freshmen about this is who your faculty are, this is what's important to them, and this is kind of what makes them tick. And so when I came to the University of Tulsa in 2015, I was asked to submit some stories to it. I'm going to read two of them to you. One of them from my childhood, and then one of them from a most recent trip to O'Hare Airport that has changed my sense of who I am every time I step in that airport, every time. So the first story is called Too Close to Cast Stones, and it dates back to when I was a child. Starts out with, watch out for your little brother, Mom had said before we left home for a 1-mile walk down a rural highway to a friend's house. JP was only 9. That's my little brother, who is now the medical director of the Cystic Fibrosis Research Foundation. He's really smart. He's the kind of kid that didn't have to study in medical school. He is disgusting. He was only 9, and watching out for him was easier said than done. I was 11. Out on the road, there was JP, randomly kicking an aluminum can and complaining about how long the walk was taking. Each kick betrayed more pent-up frustration than one before, until one final kick sent that can high into the air and out into the traffic on the busy highway. Speeding cars from both directions swerved and slammed on their brakes to avoid the can as it bounced from car to car, windshield to windshield. Somehow, everyone managed to stop without incident. Before I could let JP have it for being such an idiot, 4 teenagers in a pickup truck yelling at obscenities cut me short. They sped off, tires screeching, before abruptly turning onto a gravel road just 25 yards ahead. Still yelling at us, they all got out of the pickup. The gravel road had just been serviced by the county, with a fresh load of baseball-sized stones. Those teens began scooping up those stones and hurling them at us. As a young boy growing up in the 1960s, I had often watched and then discussed the evening news with my father. It was a special time alone with my dad. We had 6 kids in the family, without interruptions from my siblings. Together we watched daily reports from Vietnam, coverage of the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, and the attempted assassination of Alabama Governor George Wallace. We watched the demonstrations in Chicago and Detroit, and protests against the war, against segregation, against voting restrictions. I was 11 years old, and having watched others fight for their cause on the TV news somehow turned into my own first call to action out on that gravel road, out there on that highway with JP. We dodged the stones as best we could from the ditch beside the road, but we were trapped. To our left was the busy highway, and on the right, a barbed wire fence. The teens' stones rained down on us for at least 5 minutes. For the first time in my young life, I decided it was time to take a stand. I was incensed by the unfairness of the situation. The teenagers' reaction to my little brother's carelessness was beyond pale. I sternly ordered JP to stay put, and then throwing caution to the wind, I stood up from that ditch and started walking down the shoulder of the highway toward the teenagers. What a moron, they laughed. Now the stones came harder and exclusively at me. One stone hit me in the shoulder and it hurt. Another hit me in the leg, it hurt even more. The pain pushed me to walk toward them faster, taller, more committed. Give me your best shot, I thought. I can take it. When I had drawn within 15 feet, they suddenly stopped throwing and just stared at me. And I stared back. It was as if I was now too close for them to cast stones. They needed more distance and the anonymity that came with it to be comfortable in trying to hurt me. I had taken that distance away. This kid is crazy. Let's get out of here, said the driver to his friends. Heads down, they silently got back in the truck and slowly disappeared down the gravel road. Decades later, I often think of that evening. Casting stones in a public setting dates back centuries, with references in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, in the Quran, among the Greeks and among the Aztecs. Stoning was a favored method of torture and execution, as no individual could be identified as the one who actually killed the subject. There was anonymity in numbers and in the physical distance from being the one being stoned. While stoning is still practiced in some parts of the world today, the casting of stones is more often figurative than literal. Consider, for example, the pressures of middle and high school students, where groups and cliques cruelly ridicule outsiders from the most trivial of social infractions. Today, the connectivity, speed, and interpersonal distance of social media allows cyberbullying to thrive. In the professional world, I have been stoned several times when called to meetings to work through a difficult negotiation. Having arranged and expected a one-on-one meeting with a CEO, I was instead ambushed by a team of 8 executives in a conference room. Watching the evening news with my father and my small childhood victory on that highway have helped me to deal with those who intimidate using many against one strategies. Knowing when to stand up against those casting stones is difficult. If one decides it's worth being struck by those stones, figuratively or literally, the 3 principles below may prove useful. And this is now to our freshman students. The first is to realize that those in a crowd casting stones are the weaker ones. They are the cowards. Cowards find safety in numbers, since they know they have the weaker argument. They cannot win one-on-one, so they resort to the many against one strategy. In the 1960s, George Wallace clearly had the weaker position regarding the law and civil rights in Alabama. So he confronted nonviolent protesters with hundreds of heavily armed police. Deep down, Wallace knew he was wrong and that Martin Luther King was right. And so Wallace let an army of police make the arguments for him. The second is to stay committed without relenting and without retaliating. I held my ground, but I did not throw a single stone at those teenagers. As they retreated in their truck, I imagine they felt shame in the way they treated an 11-year-old boy. Martin Luther King never retaliated, but he also never backed down from his position. His use of nonviolent, peaceful resistance is legendary. It enabled him to shame those who would attack the powerfully peaceful resistors. In Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma, after violent attacks on peaceful protesters, Wallace and his mob were shamed into backing down by a nation that watched in horror. Finally, I offer this third principle. There's something disarming about actually seeing someone's face. In confronting his or her humanity, those teenagers struggled to cast stones as I grew closer. We could see each other's faces. In our technology-rich world, there is benefit to old-fashioned face-to-face engagement as opposed to emails, texts, tweets, and posts. One-on-one, you become too close to cast stones. So that was a story I wrote to our students, and I enjoy reading it every time. It was a pivotal time in my life as a young man, and it was really nice how it all came together. We were talking at our lunch table about what were some of those starting points in your life, and I said it was watching TV with my dad and watching the news. And my dad, even though I was 9, 10, 11 years old, willing to talk about these really difficult subjects with me while he drank his Schlitz beer. So I've got one more story for you, and then I'll get into my comments. This one is called All Alone in the Arena, and this one happened just a few months ago. Outside, it was snowing, wet, and heavy. Inside Terminal K in Chicago's O'Hare Airport, it was stuffy, loud, and packed with frustrated travelers whose flights were delayed by the weather. Heading home to Tulsa after a business trip, I was at the sink in the men's room washing my hands, surprised by a strange quietness and to find myself all alone. And then he appeared, an African-American gentleman, probably in his late 50s and not too much older than me, stumbled into the restroom. He groaned, clutched his chest, slumped against the wall, and fell to the floor. I knew exactly what was happening. I had seen the clinical picture of an acute myocardial infarction many times in the past in the hospital. But at the hospital, I was always part of a medical team, with the defibrillators and the EKGs and IV drugs and an intensive care unit very close by. This time it was just me. No code team, no medical equipment. I fell to my knees, rolled him on his back, and began basic cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And so there I was, all alone in the arena, in, of all places, the men's restroom floor of Terminal K. Teddy Roosevelt passionately wrote about being alone in the arena, about those who were in the arena and those on the outside who merely watched passively and critically. Teddy wrote, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The critic belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, and comes up short again and again." I love that quote, and as you might expect, I have great disdain for critics. I have found myself in the arena on several occasions, in the Texas wilderness, for 5 days with no food with my fellow young United States Air Force officers during survival school. My first time teaching to an auditorium of 250 medical students, or giving a medical school commencement address to over 3,000 with my children and wife and friends down there in the front row offering encouragement. But on the floor of the men's restroom in Terminal K, I tried to save the life of the man lying next to me. But what happened next was disquieting and disturbing. Passengers from newly arrived flights entered the restroom and stepped over me on their way to the urinals. I asked several of them to call 911. I called out for someone to bring an AED, an atrial external defibrillator, but no one immediately came to help. It was just he and I on the floor of the restroom of Terminal K. After about 15 minutes, he exhaled deeply. I was sure it was his last breath. The fire department arrived a moment later, and I stepped out of the restroom and back to the hustle and bustle of the main terminal where no one had noticed that a man had just died. I was exhausted, and my face was marred with sweat. I walked up and down the terminal trying to think through what had just happened, fully forgetting about my flight home to Tulsa. I felt totally alone, like a complete failure. I had failed at summoning 911, and the emergency medical technicians, my own medical skills and training had failed to resuscitate him. I thought about the man who had just died. What was his name? Did he have a wife, children, and grandchildren? I was sure they would have questions about how he had died. I was sure they would be disappointed in my efforts. I felt so sorry for them. I called my wife and recounted my tale, but I did not have it in me to give her all the details. I could not invite her into that arena just yet. I wandered in Terminal K for I don't know how long. When I finally made my way to my gate, I was surprised that I had not missed my flight. An airline representative somehow knew my name, thanked me for my efforts, and gave me a first-class ticket for the flight back to Tulsa. I was the only person in first class, alone yet again. When I arrived home, I told my wife the entire story and described my sense of failure. Her response was beautiful. You didn't fail. You were the one during the most personal point in his life. You were with him. You stuck by him. You did not let him die alone. Those words from my wife at home, I saw the incident from a different angle. At the University of Tulsa, we share a common goal of making our world a better place. From the arts to engineering to the health sciences, we are expected to be quite active in this pursuit. Along the way, each of us will step into that arena many times. Sometimes we'll succeed and sometimes not. Finding ourselves suddenly alone in the arena of life can be uncomfortable and painful. But that as it may we always remember, as Teddy Roosevelt encouraged us, that it is better to be on the inside striving than on the outside looking in. So as you can tell, that story still gets to me big time. So what I want to do is just talk a little bit about that background and how I'm so thankful for my parents for doing that, to really kind of instill a willingness and ability every once in a while to step out there. You know, I watched that nightly news with Robert Kennedy being shot and Martin Luther King being assassinated and the Vietnam War demonstrations, and as a young boy, I just didn't understand it. And there was my dad explaining it to me and talking about it, even at 9 or 10 years old. And so, you know, as we think about our next generation, I think it's really important to not shelter our children from what's happening in our country and in our world. It's not too much for a child to hear this and talk about it with their parents. Today, some things with our children and our grandchildren really need to be talked about where we are. We still do this as a family, for my family. My children, fortunately, are back here in Tulsa. They went to OU, and Sam, my oldest, lives here and works at Gable Gottwalls, and Mary, my daughter, is in the intensive care unit at St. Francis as a speech pathologist. And then my youngest, Joey, is off at Seattle University, but he actually Skypes in for our Sunday night dinners. And that's the only technology we allow at the dinner. And his wife, Hannah, who is a Teach for America teacher there, and we talk about deep stuff. We talk about real things. We talk about politics. I've instilled in my children, they read the Tulsa World every day. They take the paper version and they still read it. So, so we always have just these rich and vibrant discussions. I just think it's important, you know, face to face, not too close or too close to be able to cast stones, and we talk about these things. Another thing I think is important for us with our next generation is make sure we let them experiment out in the world. I think about my parents letting me walk down a country road to my friend's house a mile away. I'd never let my kids do that, but we do. We do have to let our kids experiment a little bit and fail a little bit. I think that's important. And I think we all have defining moments in life sometimes when, and I call these to my students, I call them, it's part of your storyboard of your life. If you think about your life as they sketch out a movie, there are particular scenes that you put up on the storyboard that are key moments in that movie that you're laying out there. You have storyboard moments in your life. That time in the arena or in the airport, that was a storyboard moment for my life, very, very much so. That kicking the can down the road by my idiot brother was a storyboard moment in my life. And I had a recent one. Lynn talked about us starting some OU clinics. They were the Bedlam clinics in partnership with OSU. And my kids, during our Sunday night dinners, would hear all about the development of the Bedlam clinics. And they've been going since 2002. So one day, I'm seeing patients out at the Tisdale Clinic in North Tulsa, and I get a text from my daughter. And she's a camp counselor at New Life Ranch on the Oklahoma-Arkansas border. And she says, I got somebody, and I'm bringing him to you. And I said, tell me a little more. And she said, well, it's one of my campers' fathers. My camper said that last weekend they had picked out a burial plot for his dad. He had lost his job, he had cancer, he couldn't get any health care, and so they were planning for him to die. And my daughter said, you know, we had all those Sunday night dinners. I'm going to call you on this. I'm bringing him to you. And I said, you still got to give me more. And she says, he's got a massive tumor in his jaw right here. And an hour later, an hour and a half later, she arrived at the Bedlam Clinic bringing me a new patient. And now I had two sets of eyes looking at me. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And this is a pivotal moment in my daughter's life. I better find a solution to this for this, because you know my daughter's going to think I am a loser. And fortunately, you know, I've been in Tulsa long enough. I have the cell phone of a lot of people. And I called the CEO of St. Francis, and I told him my story. I said, my daughter brought him to me. I'm bringing him to you. And he said, we'll take care of it. And he did take care of it. I mean, but it just shows how relationship and follow through is so important. 6 months later, around Christmas time, Mary's camp counselors had a reunion out at New Life Ranch, and she saw Bo. Bo was the camper, and she was very worried to even ask Bo about her father. But she had enough courage, and she said, Bo, how's your dad? And she said, oh, he's back to work. He's fine. He had had surgery. He had had radiation. It was bone cancer. It had a terrible prognosis. They were able to cure him, and they were living comfortably with his job back in place. And I said, thank you, God, for helping me complete that circle. I mean, it was really great to see. Yeah, it was good. It was a good one. So, being a university president, there's a lot of things we can do. But one of the things I'm trying to instill at TU is a willingness to take on the difficult things. So I'm going to go over 5 difficult things that we're taking on at TU right now that are a little non-traditional. The first is sexual assault on campus. The second is binge drinking on campus. The third is really feeling like and building that connection of our student athletes and our athletic programs to the full fabric of the university, not just as a Saturday event, but every day, all day long. The fourth is the central role that Gilcrease Museum can play in really helping some of the tension and understanding that we need to improve upon in this country. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the mental health plan. So just 5 areas that, as an institution, I'm trying to instill a sense of courage, that we step out there and go in a different direction than other institutions. When I came on as president in November of 2016, came on 2 months earlier than expected. Stead was ready to step down, and I said, yeah, I'll start early. We just had 4 very publicly prominent sexual assaults happen on campus. And student trust in the administration that we would handle sexual assault on campus was low. We had done polling of our students, and it was polling below 50% of the students felt like the administration was handling it well and could be trusted to handle it. Many of them in those polls said it's not even worth reporting because nothing's going to happen at the University of Tulsa as far as this. And that really bothered me. That really bothered me. So I told our leadership team, we are going to take a different approach than other institutions. We're going to talk about this up front and personal. And they said, how are you going to do that? I said, it's going to be on the first day of school. We have this grand opening of the university when the freshmen come into the Reynolds Arena and the parents are there and it's matriculation and the students give great speeches. And I said, we're going to talk about on-campus rape in matriculation. And they looked at me in horror. And I said, nope, I'm a parent of college students. I have a daughter who goes to this university. I want to hear from the leadership that you take this seriously and you're not hiding behind a great website and hiding behind a very nice brochure. So we did that. and we got a standing ovation for it. And this year I had to miss matriculation, so my wife, Paula, read her version of the same script. And she was fabulous. In fact, she's replacing me as far as that. I got a lot of people who said, you're good, but she's a lot better than you at delivering that. We've trained our security officers in what's called trauma-informed care, meaning that when they meet a sexual assault victim, first and foremost, they believe that the sexual assault actually happened first, rather than questioning and proving whether it happened or not, and putting that person in a position of being suspicious of whether they're telling the truth or not, and it's made a huge difference. I email the students every Friday morning because the weekends are when sexual assaults happen, and I know at our highest risk period now, and I tell students, I know the highest risk period for being sexually assaulted, it is a football Saturday night, freshman women being at the fraternities drinking too much. And I say to these students, you're at risk during this time period. Don't put yourself in this position. And it comes directly from me just to the students. We have new pathways of reporting for our students, confidential ways that they can report that this happened, but I don't want to go any farther. Or I can report and I want to throw this guy in prison for life. Yeah, we'll do that as well. We've got a new relationship with Tulsa Police Department as well. Very trusting, back and forth, back and forth. My goal is if you have committed rape on my campus, you go away for 50 years. That's what I want, and I want to send that message loud and clear. Yeah. We've had Brenda Tracy come on campus. Brenda Tracy was a victim of sexual assault at the University of Oregon. She's a very, very compelling speaker. She has spoken to all of our student athletes. We have a program called Man to Man, where we bring all the men on campus together and we talk about their responsibility in preventing sexual assault. One of the things I'm really, really proud of is that our student athletes have stepped up on that. When we have the man-to-man session, it is packed full of the student athletes. I get a text from the basketball players this year, Sterling Taplin, during the middle of our presentations, Doc Clancy, I got your back on this. And I texted back to Sterling Taplin, how'd you get my cell number? But you got to step out and go in a different direction than just, we're a great university and everything's wonderful. I want to be able to prove to families we just don't look good. We are good at what we do as a university. It's really important. We've pooled or surveyed the students again, and that less than 50% confidence in administration is now at 89%. So we're really proud of that. We've made a difference on that one. Next big one I'm taking on is binge drinking. It is in the fabric of American college to think that binge drinking is normal. And it's been put into our Hollywood films, Animal House, Old School. I mean, it's all just normalizes it, that binge drinking is just fine. And then sexual predation on women is just fine. And I'm really, really taking it seriously now. I've applied the state of Oklahoma's social host law big time to our campus policies. If you host a party and someone is underage and they are drinking and they are injured or killed, that's a felony. And I've let our students know that, and boy, that's an eye-opener to the fraternities. Yeah, you got a sign right here that you're a social host, and if someone gets hurt or injured, that's a felony. We are really working hard on the student athletes and having them people understand that how much they add to our university. They really do. The mission of the University of Oklahoma, or University, I'm sorry. I mean, mission of the University of Oklahoma is fine, but the mission of the University of Tulsa is great. I will remind OU and OSU that TU is ranked higher than them, far and away higher than them as far as the national. Yeah, and we're number 87, number 87 in the country out of 4,000 universities. So I will remind you that. The mission of the University of Tulsa is to educate men and women of diverse backgrounds and cultures with the values of excellence in scholarship, dedication to free inquiry, and a commitment to humanity and integrity of character. And our student athletes live that every day. They are excellent in the classroom, as mentioned before. We had a Rhodes Scholar last year. That Rhodes Scholar was also the captain of the cross-country team. The work that he is doing on solar power is extraordinary. I think he's going to go from Rhodes Scholar to Nobel Scholar as well. He's just brilliant. Kirk Smith, he is just a fantastic kid. Our football players, oftentimes football players get stereotyped. Our football players, 31 different majors: chemical engineering, electrical engineering, biochemistry, computer sciences, cybersecurity. They're out there. They are fully in the classrooms and doing the hard work as well. And as mentioned, they gave money. They raised money last year for Hurricane Harvey. We were able to provide $55,000 at the University of Houston game that we won because the stadium was full. The students did that themselves. And this year, Ashley Montgomery, with the football players, raised $1.1 million. Their goal this year is $1.2 million for that. The first home game, September 1st, is our hometown heroes game. We are honoring police, fire, sheriff's department, and EMTs. Please come out to that game. It's against Central Arkansas. It's nice. There's beer and wine and snow cones. It really should be great. Last year, I don't know if anybody remembers, Martin Luther King Day in Tulsa was 20 degrees and windy. It was freezing. And we had over 200 student athletes at the Martin Luther King Parade. And they come from all over the country. They don't understand how cold you can be at 20 degrees. They did not wear the right clothes. With several of them in shorts, and I'm just looking at them. That's a lesson you're going to learn. That's a lesson. So I'm really proud of them, and you're going to hear me messaging this a lot more, that those student athletes, and their byline is for our city. They're here for our city, and we need to be there for them. A fourth area that we're just ramping up now is Gilcrease Museum. Gilcrease Museum is a $2 billion asset to the city of Tulsa. It's extraordinary. What is there? There is 1,306 Thomas Moran paintings at Gilcrease Museum. We can only put 5% of the collection on display at any one time. But what is there is extraordinary. What Thomas Gilcrease did was started collecting American artifacts at a time. He wanted to collect Renaissance paintings, but they were too expensive. So he thought, I'm going to collect the story of America and make sure it all stays together. And his original goal was to be able to tell the very important stories of the Americas, and so we wouldn't repeat mistakes. He was Native American, he was Creek Nation, and he really, really felt down deep that the Native American nations and tribes had been mistreated. And he wanted to preserve history so it wouldn't be repeated again as far as mistreatment and breaking of promises and such. And so that's what the museum really stands for. And this next version, the $65 million expansion that you're going to see with Vision 2025, is going to be very much a museum of American art and history, and it's going to be a resource for people to learn from our mistakes in the past. It's an extraordinary place. Last February of 2017, I was out at the University of Virginia for a week doing a number of visiting lectures. When I was in Charlottesville, you could feel the tension in the air, very much so. And before I left, I went out to Gilcrease Museum, and I said, do you have anything on Thomas Jefferson? Because Charlottesville really is the home to Thomas Jefferson, and Monticello is just up on the hill looking down over the University of Virginia, and Thomas Jefferson founded the University of Virginia. And they had wonderful letters, wonderful, wonderful letters. I was able to make copies and bring them to the Virginians, and they'd never seen them before because they were at Gilcrease. My favorite letter was the one that was written July 1st, 1776. People in Virginia were complaining that Thomas Jefferson was spending his whole summer in Philadelphia. What are you doing? Get back home, do some governing like you're supposed to. And he writes back to them in a kind of a quip, soon I will declare my intentions. And he was writing the Declaration of Independence. So, he just gave him a hand at, be ready, something big's coming. It was really neat to see that personal touch. And the Charlottesvillians and University of Virginia had never seen that before. They just ate it up. They were jealous that we had Gilcrease Museum. We were at the National Archives earlier this year, and at first I met with the director of the National Archives, and he's a political appointee, when we talked to him, it was all about him. Then I got to talk to the real museum archivist, and we told him what was at Gilcrease, and he was just, wow, wow, wow. Here's kind of the best American historian of archives and such, and he's coming. And we're looking for a partnership with those type of museums that people can understand. Come to Tulsa. It's an incredible, incredible thing, and it's been a great gift that Tulsans have given for us to be able to expand Gilcrease Museum. The last big project that we're working as a university on is our state of mental illness and addiction in this state. And it's something that, it's the reason why I went into psychiatry in the first place, is that there's a great innocence to mental illness and addiction, Most people with a mental illness never did a single thing in their life to be afflicted with a mental illness. If you look at post-traumatic stress, who in the world would walk into a situation like that and have a life-threatening event such as seeing their fellow soldier injured or killed, or a bomb going off right in front of them? There's an innocence to post-traumatic stress disorder. There's an innocence to depression. There's an innocence to schizophrenia. I have never seen a single patient who ever did a single thing to bring on their schizophrenia. But we have some real problems, particularly in Oklahoma. Individuals with mental illness in Tulsa, Oklahoma die 27 years earlier than the individuals that don't. The life expectancy for an individual with serious mental illness is less than 50 years old. And we've got to do better on that. We've got to do a whole lot better on that. Tulsa Public Schools really struggles with suicide among elementary school and teenagers. When I was going through residency training, suicide among children was unheard of. And now Tulsa Public Schools gets a suicide note every single day. We've got to get a handle on this, a much better handle. We have 10,000 people in the Tulsa County Jail a year with a mental illness diagnosis. There's a better way. There's a better way, than that's the pathway of least resistance for someone with a mental illness as far as where they're going to be. And the biggest problem we have is stigma, far and away. The biggest problem, people still think that mental illness is a personal weakness. Somehow you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a brain disease. This city has a wonderful, quietly wonderful place called the Laureate Institute of Brain Research, where they are discovering the neuroscience proof of all the mental illness. It's extraordinary what they're doing, absolutely extraordinary. So, did I come close to 50 minutes? 5 more. I'll open up. I got nothing left. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody does. If not, I'll dance for another 5 minutes. Anything? Any questions? Yes, Jim. How do we fill the stadium? We're working against something that is just incredibly convenient. If you look at what TV has done and what furniture salesmen have done, I mean, it's really comfortable to sit in your chair and watch and go back and forth, and the angles that you get are just, so we're working against that. And so what we've tried to do is make the experience at the TU games as competitive as the experience of sitting at home and watching it on TV. And so being social and having the food available and having places for the kids to run around. I mean, what I love about Skelly Stadium, it's a lot of it is like it was 30 years ago as far as safe and free to run around. When I would bring my kids to the Skelly Stadium and just let them go free, because they're going to be watched over there. It's a great experience. I think part of what we're trying to do is tell the story more about who those student athletes are as well, and they really are great people. They really are great people, and you're going to hear a lot more of that. And they deserve it. Those student athletes deserve it. I really think so. I really think so. Yeah, good question. Yes?
What do you think are some of the biggest ethical dilemmas that our youth are entering into now?
So, some of the biggest ethical dilemmas, I think, particularly in higher education, we are seeing a huge increase in first-generation college students. The fact that their family has never gone to college before. Yeah, I was number 5 out of 6 kids. My 4 other brothers and sisters were ahead of me. They all went to college. My dad was a university professor. Going to college for me was a piece of cake compared to some other students who family and they don't even know how to get started. Some of the ethical dilemmas then are, can I get enough resources over to that side of the university that when they start off, they have a good runway for them to tease it. They're very bright. They're extremely bright students. That's not the problem. Our ACT at TU still is somewhere between 29 and 30 every year. I mean, it rocks it. It rocks it. So these are really, really bright students. And our ACT score has not dropped as we've seen a big increase in first-generation students. So it's a testament to how bright they are. Well, I've just got to be able to have enough resources that the support services are there for them. So that's my ethical dilemma, is moving money around all the time, all the time. Yeah.
What about their challenges? What kind of ethical dilemmas do you think the generation coming
Sure.
up, what should we, I mean, from an employer standpoint?
Yeah. I still think, I'm going to go back to kind of what they're facing. I teach a class called Presidential Leaders Fellowship, how to solve complex problems. And each year we come up with a set of topics that are very topical to today. So last year we did K through 12 education, we did health disparities, and we did U.S.-China relations. And lo and behold, as the fall rolled out, those were all really hot issues. And I made them write policy on those things. And they developed a piece of legislation called the Oklahoma Long-Term Economic Development Investment Act. And we gave it to Monroe Nichols, and he took pieces of it and wrote legislation. Unfortunately, it was entirely unconstitutional how they wrote it. And this year we're doing free speech on campus. Free speech on campus. And we're doing education. And these students are all over it. We want to talk about free speech. We want to have a diverse campus, but we also want to be able to speak freely. And yeah, they really do. Yeah. It's really impressive. I mean, they're great. They are great. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with them. Yeah.
Do you think social media influences?
Yeah, I mean, the students learn in multi-information modes at all times. They have their headphones on, listening to music, with their laptop up here, and their phone over here, and then their books here. I mean, there's stuff going on all the time. I had to be in the library all by myself, dead silence, with my textbook and my highlighter. They learn entirely different, and we have to meet them there as far as that. That's how they want to learn. And they hate PowerPoint. They hate it. They hate it. So I told my professors that. I said, we did a survey of our students. By the way, they hate PowerPoint. Oh, no. No. 15 minutes of PowerPoint. The rest of the time, put them in situations where they can talk and learn from each other. And the students learn so much better that way. Yeah. A lot of fun that way. Yeah. Yes? Yes, Tim. How are you? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a terrible way to handle the mentally ill. What are some innovative
Yeah.
ideas that you see in other jurisdictions that we might be able to bring to the first district, to Tulsa, and do it better? This
Yeah.
is costing us a lot of money, and we're not getting a good return, nor is it humane to treat these
Yeah.
people this way in the jail. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Tim. The problem is really not the Tulsa County Jail. The problem is what happens after that. That unfortunately the pathway of least resistance oftentimes is not a very good evaluation of that person's depth of their mental illness, and then they go to prison instead. And for someone with a severe mental illness, prison is not correctional for them. It can't be. There are good models for the nonviolent offender out there. Women in Recovery is a perfect example that with the right application of resources over a long period, people can really get their life corrected and away from substance abuses. Women in Recovery is primarily for substance abuses. Drug court works well. Mental health court works well. But the biggest problem is that the alternatives for the judge and the DA and the public defender to guide somebody to are just not adequate enough. So we need to scale up those things as much as we can, because there's proven models out there that alternatives can work with the right level of support for the nonviolent person. There's better ways to go. There's better ways to go. Yeah, you've been a champion of that. You know. Yeah. Yes.
Dr. Clancy, my daughter's a freshman at the university this year, and she's very socially aware of what's going on racially in the community. What does the university have in place so that they can handle that?
Yeah.
And everyone feels included and not marginalized?
Yeah. Great question. So, we start with that with the freshmen as they come in, and just, this is our campus environment. This is our culture. We very strongly embrace international students. And last night we had the Association of International Students had their welcome picnic for everybody, and it was packed. And it really was an international affair where everyone is welcome. We make sure that we talk about things like free speech on campus. We don't hide from it. It's part of our classwork as well that we're going to hide from it. We have had several students who have felt the need for safe zones as particular political actions have happened. We supported that right away. And we very much listen to the students, and when there's something that needs to happen quickly, we do quickly. So the students really felt a need for a safe zone discussion with the president. We did that the next morning. Yeah. What I really like about my freshman class is it is very diverse and extremely collegial how they're getting along. It's really, really good. Yeah. Great. Now have I hit 50 minutes? Yeah, no, great. I appreciate being here, everyone. Thank you.